coming back. We're now about to start the third session, and this is about the essentials of legal advocacy. So we have 4 cases on the panel. They're all going to be introduced by Zakira Eleena. Zakira Eleena is a director at a law firm. Is the director of dispute resolution from Field Fisher. So we're at Field Fisher on day 2. So she's come all the way down from Birmingham, traveled all the way down to join us, so she can moderate this panel and keep these fierce cases in order. Just put them into shape. Anyway, without further ado, I'll hand over to her.
Hi everyone, thank you, Sultana. Thank you, Sultana. Thanks everyone. Welcome to the afternoon session of the Advocacy Bootcamp. So as Sultana said, my name is Zakira Eleena. I work at Field Fisher in the Birmingham office, and I'm a director in the dispute resolution team. So what that means is that essentially I deal with any kind of commercial disputes that's litigation, which means when businesses have fallings out and they go to court, or arbitration, which is a sort of private kind of dispute resolution where essentially it's a very similar kind of process, but it's a more specialized and tailored forum for the businesses that they get to choose. So I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. I was thinking about this on the way over, and I don't think I've ever sat next to 4 cases who are all talking and agreeing about the same thing. So I'm really excited. And it is genuinely a very unique opportunity, and I hope everyone takes advantage of it. So by way of introduction, we've got Ijeoma Omambala, KC, Eleena Misra, KC. We've got Nadia Motraghi. Is that?
That's right.
Yes. KC, and Rebecca. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to start you off by asking you all to do a very brief introduction about who you are, perhaps when you took Silk and your career and what kind of work that you do. That would be great. Thank you. Start with you, Ijeoma.
Yeah, sure. So I am, as you know, Ijeoma Omambala. I do mostly employment, equality and public law work. I have been a barrister for far too long. I took Silk in 2020, having slogged for a long time doing lots of very interesting cases. I do quite a lot of novel cases where we're testing points of law, where we're trying to push the boundaries a little bit and see if we can persuade judges to come with us on that journey. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, but it's always an enjoyable ride. I love advocacy, and I hope I'm going to get to talk to you a little bit about that in a few minutes. I can't think of anything else to say about me, really, other than that.
That's great.
Yeah, is that okay? Good.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Eleena Misra, and I was called to the bar in 2001, Middle Temple. I started off my practice doing quite a bit of commercial law, and then I kind of fell into employment law and fell in love with it and started specialising that. So really now, I, in common with my colleagues, specialise in employment inequalities, and I also do quite a bit of professional discipline and regulation as well. And also in common with my lovely colleagues and friends on this table, sit as a part-time judge. So part-time or fee-paid means that our principal day job is being a barrister, but you sometimes go and sit as a judge. So it's quite interesting to see things from that side as well. And finally, I'm chair of the Law Reform Committee at the Bar Council. So something I'm particularly passionate about is using the law to change things in society. So I get to see a lot of different consultations and work, not just in the area of employment law, but actually been doing lots of work on the migration bill, the Rwanda bill, lots of work on surrogacy law. So it keeps me on my toes with a lot of different topics. And hopefully I'll get to speak to you all a little bit later today in one of the workshops.
Great. I'm Nadia Motraghi, and like the others on the panel, I'm predominantly an employment specialist, and I also do a lot of work to do with discrimination cases and whistleblowing. The sectors that I tend to work in are anything to do with healthcare, in particular doctors, any cases to do with schools and universities, banks and financial services. Those tend to be the areas where I most often appear. I love advocacy. I love being in court. Always have enjoyed public speaking and things like that. As Eleena said, I'm also a judge, and I sit in the county court, so I deal with all sorts of disputes to do with weird and wonderful things, which take me outside what I normally do in the day job. And when it was COVID, I was one of the first barristers to write about the effect of COVID-19 on employment law and employment relationships. And so I got to appear on TV talking about that quite a bit. including appearing on the Martin Lewis Money Show for a number of weeks, which was a lot of fun.
I met you all earlier. I'm Rebecca, and I'm still a barrister, and I'm still at Old Square. I'm also a part-time judge, and I've been here since the 90s, when I managed to get through an interview being conducted by Ms. Omambala, who was of great assistance when I got stuck on a question, and I've been here ever since. You've also got in the corner, if you've got any questions for later on, our colleague Deshpal Panazar. So we were explaining headgear in courts, and when he goes to court, he wears a white turban. So there you go.
I'm just the cameraman.
And a great male ally. Yes. So thank you. And I should have said, I was called to the bar in 2004 and I became a silk in a KC in 2023.
Fantastic, thank you. So Rebecca, maybe we can start from that side and then work our way back down. But can you talk us through any issues when it comes to advocacy? Are there any issues that you feel really strongly about or you've had the opportunity to work on during your career that stand out for you as particularly meaningful?
So I'm an advocacy trainer at Gray's Inn. And for me, the best part of advocacy is cross-examination. And in due course, I'm going to talk about questions and how to ask them and retain control, and whether you're asking things about where you want to give people a choice or not.
Very good. That's going to be sounds interesting.
Great. So I also really love cross-examination. And one of my most memorable cases was a case where we were absolutely doomed to failure because my client was an employee who'd done some extremely bad things and reacted in very aggressive and unpleasant ways and fell very firmly within the disciplinary policy. But I turned that around and I suggested that it was precisely because of that extreme behaviour that it called for an explanation and an investigation into what was wrong with this man. And I managed to, under cross-examination, get the chief executive of that financial services company to agree with me that that was the case and that he should have taken that step to investigate. And that completely changed the case around and turned this, what we thought was a dead cert loser, into a winner of a case, which obviously pleased my client no end.
I love all aspects of advocacy, although I'm probably a little bit partial to cross-examination as well. But one of the things I really love about advocacy in this particular profession is it's possibly one of the last bastions of being able to take completely different viewpoints and to be able to argue it fiercely, robustly, in a way that is still professional, is courteous, and doesn't try to shut down legitimate arguments. And I think in the society we're in now, the art of being able to argue in a measured and powerful way is a really important tool for us all to have.
Okay, so I came to the bar via, if you like, activism. I worked for a number of years with survivors of sexual violence, and I did a lot of advocacy around race and mental health and criminal justice issues. And that's what brought me ultimately to the bar. I, like my colleagues, enjoy most parts of being an advocate. I particularly enjoy watching my opponent's face as their key witness crumbles under the pressure that we've been applying. But I think one of the great things about advocacy, and one of the points where we make a difference, is where you've got a situation or you've got a case and really it could go either way, and something that you say or do or help to say or do switches it in your favor. And those are really kind of powerful moments, and really moments where you feel like you've done something useful. And there've been one or two occasions where I've had the privilege of that experience. I very many years ago was involved in some equal pay litigation where dinner ladies were comparing the work that they did to the work of bin men and saying that it was just as hard, just as difficult, just as unpleasant, all you school children. And that they ought to be paid the same. And we had long arguments in tribunals up and down the country about that. And the high point was when we got a decision which meant that all of our clients and all of the dinner ladies that were employed and all the local authorities that we were representing would be paid on an equal footing to their male bin men. And we had a great party. And it was one of the most enjoyable moments of my career.
I mean, and that case is
Still running on, I'm afraid.
It's so funny, but it has created a bit of societal impact, hasn't it? And we kind of read about it, and we see that in the work that I do, certainly. So it's a perfect example about how your work in the courtroom has a real life impact on so many people.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Kind of related to that question, if you had to sort of identify 2 to 3 top skills that maybe people in the audience would like to think about doing what you do for a living, what are the top skills that you think are really critical to successful advocacy?
Okay, so I think one of the top skills for an advocate, which is seriously underrated, is the ability to listen. Lots of people can talk. Lots of people can talk well, but it's about listening and listening actively to what's being said, to the way that it's being said, and also to what's not being said. And if you've got that, and you've got that in your armory, you will be one step further forward in being a really, really good advocate. The other thing that so I'm an advocacy trainer. I train trainers and I train students. And one of the things I'm endlessly banging on about is the power of simplicity, keeping it simple. You want to ask a question that anyone can understand, so that if you don't get an answer, or if you get an answer which is confused and mangled, you can turn in your closing speech and say to the judge, it was a really clear and straightforward question, and this witness could not answer that. So I would say listening and being clear and keeping it simple.
Stamina, because actually a good advocacy is built on a lot of hard work in preparing your case, knowing your case inside out. And in order to be able to deal with that level of preparation, and indeed the new evidence that comes out in a trial, for example, you've got to be able to pace yourself, and you've got to be able to keep going, so you're ready when you get there.
Okay, I'm getting all of mine crossed off my list here. So I'm going to say being very analytical. What you know, for every hour that you spend inside a courtroom, you're spending hours and hours and hours outside the courtroom preparing. And a large part of that is taking huge volumes of paper very often and analysing that and separating the wheat from the chaff and working out what it is that really this case is about. What's the key issue or issues, and how do you demonstrate that? So that requires a lot of analysis. And the other part that I was going to stress is attention to detail, because it's not enough to sort of paint a picture with a broad brush. You need to absolutely get to the heart of it. And so, you know, having that forensic attention to detail is really important.
So it's really hard answering this one last after they've taken all the best answers. Calm under pressure, because when Nadia talks about getting the huge amount of paper, and Eleena talks about you're having to have stamina to work hard. What you can't do, if you're going to formulate your simple questions, what you can't do is panic and say, oh, it's all too much, I can't do it. You've got to be calm under pressure, and you've got to take it all in your stride. And even if under the water you're a swan, so you glide along the surface, even if under the water you're paddling like crazy, you look to the outside world as though you are the serene swan gliding along the surface.
Very good, especially paddle like crazy, but under the water. It's really interesting that when you talk about being a part-time judge and also an advocate, so when you're an advocate, of course, you take a position and advocate for that position, you push that position. When you're a judge, of course, it's very different. You have to be sort of impartial, and you're an adjudicator, you're listening and receiving to what's being said. Do you find it difficult sort of making the shift between advocate and judge when you're sitting as a judge, or what are the challenges of that? Eleena, you want to go first?
Oh, I have to sort of almost sit on my hands if I have 2 advocates in front of me and I think they're both sort of missing the point. It's quite tricky. So remember, you're not going to enter into the fray as a judge. you have a very distinct role. So yeah, I do find it something I have to work on as a judge. And you do, when you start out, have to sort of get used to that role. So I think being very clear that you're not entering the fray is an important thing.
I think actually becoming a judge has made me a much better advocate, because I realise now how important it is to help the judge. As an advocate, obviously you're there to put your client's case and to try and win for your client, but you have to do that in a way that makes the judge's life easy and strip out all of the extra things and get straight to the heart of it. So now when I sit as a judge, if somebody isn't doing that straight away, then I get quite frustrated with that. And I just think, get to the point, I don't want to hear all these peripheral matters, just, hit me with the good stuff here. So I think that's made me more focused in my own advocacy than I was before. So I think that's quite helpful as a judge.
So, like Eleena, I sometimes struggle, particularly if somebody's attempting to do a cross-examination and they're doing it really badly. I write a yellow sticky and put it at the top of my notepad saying, shut up, to stop myself from diving in. But at the end of the day, you don't enter the fray, but you have got to make sure that all the issues in the case have been addressed. You've got to make sure you've heard all the relevant evidence. And what I realized quite quickly is that when you ask the question of a witness as the judge, the witness wants to please you. They want to be on your good side. They want to be able to agree if they can. Whereas when you're cross-examining, they're very wary of you because you're the enemy, you're the other side. They want to disagree with everything you say. So you do have to be careful about how you pose questions and what opportunity you give to the witness to allow them to give their best answer and the facts.
You have anything to add?
No, I think I think one of the nice things about being the judge is that you can be nice to everybody, because it's your job to make sure that the hearing is fair and that everyone has an opportunity to say what they came to say, whether it's useful or not. And so telling barristers to behave themselves, making sure that people are respectful and polite to each other is actually a really important part of the role of a judicial office holder. And it's quite nice sometimes just to not be involved in the argy-bargy and just, telling people to be kind and behave themselves.
That's very important. Does anyone have any questions at this point for the panel? Oh, yes, one of them has a list.
What advice would you give to somebody that's really shy? So they want to speak, but they're super shy and they don't know if what will come out of their mouth will make sense. What advice you would give to somebody? How do they come out of their shell? How do they manage their nerves?
I don't mind going first on this one. I think it's practice, practice, practice. No one is born a fantastic advocate out of the womb. This is something that people hone. It's a skill just like any other. Don't expect anybody to be a great driver on day one or to speak French on your first day at school. So, it's a question of practicing and realizing that everybody started somewhere, and that with some practice, you'll get better over time.
Can I just add one thing, which is sometimes the hardest thing is to get those first few sentences out. So I think even if you just practice the beginning of what you're going to say, so it just gives you a nice, comfortable way in.
Yeah.
Once you hit your stride, it can be a little bit easier.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. And one of the things that we say to people who are new to public speaking and who have to get up and say something is just to, if you do nothing else, write the first sentence of what you're going to say down, because that way, however nervous you feel, however shaky you're feeling, you've got it down there. And getting over that initial thing is often, a huge hurdle and makes a big difference. And I have to say, you may find it hard to believe, but I am actually quite a shy and retiring person. I am not a natural public speaker. I am not an extrovert. One of the things that I found helped me as an advocate was that it's easier to advocate for other people than it is to speak on your own behalf. So if you're speaking about something that's important but isn't your story, actually somehow that enables you to kind of get through the nerves. And I say to all of the people that I work with, if you're not feeling slightly nervous when you first stand up or begin what you have to say, then you're probably not doing it right.
Does anyone have anything else to add before I?
And then physically, deep breath, shoulders back. Just look at one person. Choose one person who looks quite nice and friendly. They might smile at you. They're going to encourage you. And you're just talking to them and ignoring everybody else. And it makes it easier because she's really nice and smiley.
I would just add to that, one of the best bits of advice I was given by one of my supervisors when I started was fake it till you make it. So I was literally thrown into the deep end where I was taken into chambers at the time and nudged and said, go on, you know the case, you do it. And it was a matter of single swim. Not the best way to do it, I should have. It's very shaky, but it's one of those things where you just have to fake it till you make it. So thank you for that. Was there another question? Yes.
Just off the back of what you were saying about how it's easier to advocate for others than it is for yourself, but kind of a lot of the journey of getting to legal advocacy and becoming a barrister, entering the legal profession, is advocating for yourself and convincing people that, yeah, actually you can do this job. You should take me on as a mini pupil, as a pupil, as like a trainee. What advice would you give, if especially somebody who is passionate about advocating for other people, when you kind of have to turn that lens kind of onto yourself? What advice would you have?
It's excruciating.
Yeah.
Turning the lens on yourself is excruciating. I'm giving a lecture in June and I've just been asked to give a 200-word biography for my introduction. It's excruciating. I must have done that hundreds of times and I still find it painful every single time. So I haven't got an answer for that. It's awful. You just have to fake it till you make it,
Well, I think I would add to that I think actually if you're looking for, before you get to the mini pupillage or the training contract, there's no end of organisations that would love you to be involved with their organisation, whether that's going and delivering campaigning leaflets, whether that's writing summaries, whether that's helping with a social media account or what have you. And you might not think at the time, actually, this is ideal. But all of those experiences start to build up a picture about somebody, about the causes that they're interested in, about the fact that they're prepared to put themselves out, about the fact they're prepared to do something that's not necessarily glamorous. A lot of what we do is not glamorous. So, it's not just about sort of getting a mini pupillage or what have you. And actually, things that might seem quite mundane are things that you can turn to your own advantage. When I was a teenager, I worked for Blockbuster Video. That's something that none of you will have heard of because you're all post-video age, but it was like a library where you'd go and get out videos. And, I learned about the workplace through that. And as somebody who wanted to become an employment lawyer, that was really important. And similarly, I worked in a biscuit factory. And so I was able to talk about disputes and how I'd solve disputes in the workplace, those sorts of things. So actually, it's not about necessarily having glitzy and glamorous work experience that enables you to sort of advocate for yourself to have one of the jobs that you're ultimately after. But even these, more basic, more rudimentary, entrances to the world of employment and work experience.
Yeah. And just to come back to your question, one of the ways in which you can kind of get over the kind of ick factor of having to tell everyone how fabulous you are is just to take a step back and think about it as if you were talking about somebody else. What would you say? What would your best friend say about you? What would the teacher that likes you best at school say about you? What would your university colleagues say about you? And think about those things. But I do think it's important to demonstrate that you have the skills, and if you don't have them fully formed, that you are open to learning them and that there are building blocks there. So it's really important to unpack what the demands are for the role that you want to carry out, and think about what you've done and how you can fit that in to the template. Okay, well, obviously I've never been to court, but what have I done? Where have I made a difference? Where have I been an advocate? And we're all advocates in every single day of our lives for all kinds of different causes. So sometimes it's just thinking a little bit creatively about what you've got and using it effectively.
the key is to emphasize on those transferable skills.
Absolutely.
So how is your work on the student committee at university? What skills did you learn even without knowing it to try and prepare for the next stage of your career? But thank you, it's a great question. Yes.
What's like a glamorized job on TV shows and things? How did you find? Because obviously I know it's not like that. It's very much so. So how did you find like the culture shock to how it really was, how much hard work?
Are there any hard perspectives in the room, by the way? Hard perspectives.
Oh, right, sorry.
The most glamorous of the room.
Okay, okay. It's
None of us have that many records in our room.
That's true. Look, it is a job that has, it's hard work, like so many jobs, like all jobs, it's hard work and there are less glamorous aspects to it, but there are really fun moments as well. So I don't think when I started off, I was expecting anything other than hard work, and I got that. And there were moments where you were just trudging through something and you thought, oh gosh, but then there were enough moments, I think, where you thought, okay, this is actually really exciting, or this is really fun, or you've got enough of those moments to balance it out. So I think as long as you're expecting a whole spectrum of different things to happen to you on your journey, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's like many of the other jobs that you might be considering, you know, there's, you know, you often don't leave at 5, or, you know, or that, you know, you have to often pick up work even when you thought you weren't going to be having to pick up work. But as Eleena said, you know, there are many high points. So, yeah, I think it balances out in the end.
And Rebecca brings a glamour to Chambers with her extensive and amazing shoe collection. She's the only lady I know who has her own shoe room, I think. So there's plenty of glamour to be had.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions? Thank you for that question. So I had a few more questions, actually. This is perhaps not talking about legal advocacy so much, but advocacy in general. So most of the participants in the audience today will exist almost seamlessly between social media and, you know, the real world. And we all know that there are risks involved to advocating digitally on the internet, social media. Do you have any advice to offer on how to navigate the risks of social media when it comes to speaking about things that are really important to you, things that might have an impact on us in the real world on social media? Rebecca?
I can guarantee, not having spoken to them, that we've all done cases which involve people putting things on social media that with hindsight, they will wish they hadn't. I think your generation is all very alive to your digital footprint, and whatever you say is going to be there forever. If in doubt, don't post it. If you've done something in the heat of the moment, sit on it until the next morning and then think, do I still want to say it in that way? Because what we're looking for in prospective barristers and prospective solicitors is what Al said earlier about being able to engage in debates in a thoughtful and respectful manner with each other. Even though you might have wildly differing views on a subject, you should be able to disagree agreeably. And finally, it's something that I touched on this morning at the introduction. In our current jobs, we're not activists, we are advocates, and we take the brief that comes along to us. And so we don't want to have said something on social media that's going to rule us out of doing that, because it's very important in the law that both parties have their case put forward, and whichever side you're on, and we all act for both employers and employees here, whichever side you're on, you put your client's case to the best of your ability.
Yeah, and actually, just to add to that, this requirement that you take whichever case comes along, that's an absolute requirement as barristers. So we've got something called the cab rank rule. So just like when you go to get a taxi, the taxi driver has to take you wherever you want to go. They can't say, no, I don't go to that area or what have you. It's the same for us. So if someone rings up and says, I want you to fight this side of the case, then you have to take it even if you would prefer to have been instructed by the other side of the case, which can often be the case for us. And I think the other thing to bear in mind when it comes to social media is things that you currently think are on the right side of the line may not be what you think are on the right side of the line in 5 years' time or 10 years' time or whatever. And things that we thought 5, 10 years or 20 years ago are no longer perceived to be on the right side of the line, or maybe we don't perceive them to be on the right side of the line. And so actually, quite apart from the fact that I've done a lot of cases, as we all have, about social media, putting things on Facebook, closed groups, open groups, Twitter, open groups, whatever it is, private social networks, anything, Snapchat, all of these things, TikTok, which lead to all sorts of bad consequences. You've got to be prepared that in years to come, there may be somebody looking at what your 15-year-old self or your 21-year-old self was putting on there and deciding, actually, that indicates to me they're not such a good person. I'm not saying excluding you from the legal profession, but might exclude you or from doing something else that you want to do. So it's a really, really good idea to be really circumspect about, really careful about what you put on social media.
You don't have to post about everything and you don't have to comment about everything either. It's perfectly fun to have those conversations in safe circles of friends. Just have conversations with other people. I know there's a lot of pressure to have social media content out there, but it's absolutely fine if you don't weigh into a particular argument. And they don't always play out that well on social media. Arguments are normally quite nuanced and people can sort of pile onto something because they've misunderstood something you've said very easily. But my top tip would be just basically don't post or comment on something if you're really tired, you're really upset, or you're really hungry. No.
Or if you're the right age, if you're drunk.
I don't myself really use social media very much, but I'm heartened by the really wise words that my colleagues have shared. I think that's all really excellent advice.
I had another question, which is slightly, seeing as we've got all women on the panel. Have you ever been struck with sort of issues relating to gender equity in your own personal journey? So getting to the level of distinction that you have. It might not have been something that mattered to you greatly, but what are the kinds of challenges that you might have had to come across and dealt with sort of very quickly or efficiently when trying to deal with perhaps misogynistic behavior, sexist behavior, any of those kind of experiences?
Life has improved a lot in the last 20 to 30 years.
That's good.
I don't think that the current generation have nearly as hard time as previous generations did. So one of your number has a mother who's done a lot of work on 100 years of women in law. And for those of you who are at the Supreme Court, you heard about Ivy Williams, the first ever barrister. Even in the 1970s, there was lots of chambers kind of thought, well, we've got the woman, we've got one of them, that's fine, we'll tick that box. And there were many chambers in the Temple in the 70s, 80s, even into the early 90s, that didn't have ladies' toilets. We're not talking about availability of period products here. We're talking about a toilet that she could use in her own place of work. And so they'd have to go out and go to the library or go to hall. The world has changed an enormous amount. And we also, all of us four here, are in a fantastic set of chambers where the major thing that we've all chosen to do is employment law. And we have lots of very progressive, great colleagues here. So the stories that you get from people who are in very male-dominated white public school tax sets might be very different from the experience that we've managed to have. So, I've never been the first woman in chambers, or Jo, you were probably the first person of colour in chambers, were you? Or the only for a long time, were you?
I was also the first woman of, let's say, childbearing age in chambers. So I was the first person in these chambers to go off on maternity leave. And when I spoke to my clerk and said that I was going to have a baby, he started giving me this kind of grand farewell speech. And I had to stop him and say, I'm coming back. So exactly. And I can remember, and I mean, I am very old, so, caveat it, I've been a barrister for about 35 years, I think. But I can remember that when I started, you couldn't go to court wearing trousers. You had to have a skirt suit, which was a real shock to me because I just wore
Until
trousers all the time.
96-ish.
Yeah.
Wow.
96.
And somebody had to sort of take me to one side and say, you can't wear trousers to work. And I was just like, what are you talking about? So it, you know, those kinds of things are still in sort of living memory. Things have got a lot better, but there are still people who are a bit handsy about. There are still people who think that certain kinds of work are for women barristers and other kinds of work are for male barristers. All of those attitudes still exist because they exist outside of the bar.
Gender,
Yeah, and
gender equal pay.
yeah, equal pay, you know, that's everybody, I'm sure here knows that women often get paid less than men for work that's either the same work or work that's in you know, in various ways as difficult as work that men often do. These are problems, societal problems. So just as they're in society, they're also in the legal profession. And one of the other problems we face is that we're instructed by solicitors. So if they have any prejudice or discrimination or bias or blind spots, then those can be reflected in the instructions that we receive. And a couple of years ago, there was a survey done, and a very sort of highly regarded, very successful law firm had done an audit of how many women barristers it instructed. And 92% of the barristers that it instructed were men. And, you know, so, you know, these are things that disadvantage women who are at the bar. One thing that I experienced when I was extremely junior, and I think I was in fact a pupil, I didn't really feel able to do anything about it, was I received a case, I received the papers. When you're starting out, you often receive the papers imminently before the hearing, like the night before. Get my papers, and then I get told, oh, no, the papers have to be given back. They're going to go to Mr. So-and-so, you know, X over there, some male barrister. And I said, why? And they said, oh, they didn't realise they were instructing female barrister. And because of their religious beliefs, they don't want a woman barrister instructing them. So I wasn't able to advocate in that case. So, you know, had that happened now, I think, I, you know, absolutely would have stood my ground, raised complaints, spoken to the solicitor, spoken to their, you know, senior partner, etc. But at the time, I didn't feel able to do that. Now, to the best of my knowledge, nothing like that is going on now, but you can never really be sure about these things. But I think what Rebecca said is absolutely right. Things have got so much better in the 20 years that I've been in chambers. And I'm not talking about problems in chambers. I'm talking about these wider societal issues that mean that sometimes women are perceived as being not as, you know, competent to do a job as a man can be, which we all know is absolute complete nonsense.
Absolutely. That's what the audience is here to change. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much for that. It's been really insightful. Thank you for taking the time out of your afternoon, and thank you everyone for listening.